Hi, it's Bill Hitchcock, and we're going to be doing some work with importing some data into Excel. So what I want you to do is we'll click on cotton prices, and this is what we call a CSV file. It's a comma separated value file. So I'm going to click on that, and if you have an option to save it, go ahead and save it. Otherwise, you can always show it in a folder. The other thing is, if you try just clicking on it, you can hope that it's going to open it up in Excel. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. It all depends on if you have the file association set up correctly. So I'm going to just show this, and it's in my downloads folder here. So, that looks all right. I can always take one of these files and drag it to my hard drive someplace else. So we want to download that first. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up Excel, and I'm going to choose File and Open, and I want to browse to where it was that I downloaded that file. So if it goes into your downloads folder, you might take a look in there. However, when you search for it, right now it's saying that there's no items to match my search. That's because it's looking for Excel files, and I need to change this and say, you know what, this one was a CSV file. So, maybe the easiest way to do it is just choose all files. And there I can see the files that I've got here. So it looks like I've got this one at 2:18 p.m. is when I was recording this. So let's open that one up. And there is my data. Now remember, this is in CSV format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. I'm going to save this file. Browse to where it is that you want to save this. So I'm just going to save this on my C drive, and I'll dump this into my temp directory. And then we want to change the file from a comma delimited or comma separated values file to an Excel workbook. So make that switch. You can change the file name to shorten it up a little bit. I'm going to call this Chapter 10 Cotton Prices. And I've got that data stored. Now, this originally came from a place called Macro Trends Data Download. Down here it's got macrotrends.net. You can see the website that I got it from. So if you need to find it, go out to macrotrends.net and find that data file. So what I want to do is I want to rename this sheet. And I'm just going to call this sheet Cotton Prices. And then I want to make a copy of this because I want to take this top part off and keep that on like a separate sheet, and then I'm just going to be working with the data itself on this one. So I'm going to right click on my sheet tab, move or copy sheet, create a copy, and it's fine that I put it before. I'll hit OK. So this one I want to just keep the source of the information. So there's the source of my data. And I'm going to click on row number 12, hold my shift key down a couple, and then hit the end and down arrow key. And you'll see there's a lot of data here. I've got over 11,000 rows of data. So I'm going to delete all of that off of this sheet. And you might want to flip this one. If you're going to do page layout, you might do landscape layout, just so that would print off on one page wide, for instance. Give me just a minute. It's taking its time. There we go. We've got that. And now here's my cotton prices sheet. So on this one, I don't need all that information up at the top. So I'm just going to delete that out of here. And I'm left with just my data. So I've got a bunch of hash marks here. That's just because the column isn't wide enough. We'll take care of some of that initial formatting here. So first, like I always like to do, I like to insert a new column. I want to keep track of the original order and also kind of get an idea about how many records I actually have here. So I'm going to call this the rec number. Type in 1, 2, 3. Highlight those cells by holding Shift and using my down arrow. Click on Home, click on a comma format, get rid of the 2 decimal places, decrease the decimal, And now double click on the fill handle, that little square box in the lower right hand corner. Double click there. Hit my end key once to turn on the end mode down here at the bottom, and my down arrow. And it goes all the way down to the bottom to 11,450. That's how many records we've got. So now I'm going to hit Control Home to get back up to the top. And I want to go to cell A2, choose View, choose Freeze Panes, and Freeze Panes. And that way, when I hit my end key and down arrow, I can still read up at the top the field names, record number, date, and value. And I've got that. Then if I hold my Control key, hit the Home key, I'm back up near the top. All right, a few other things. Normally what I'll do is I'll put averages, minimum, maximum, and put that all the way down at the bottom. But in this case, since I've got so many records, I want to keep that stuff up at the top. So let's insert a few rows up here. So I'm going to click on row number 1. And let's see, I'm going to want the count, the min, the average, the max, a price level, and then a blank line. I'm going to insert about 5 rows here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice that it says 5R to tell you how many rows you've selected. And I just clicked on the first one, held my Shift key, and used my down arrow key to select those. Then I'm going to right click on any one of these row numbers and choose Insert. So I've got that. All right, now what I want to do is I want to do some formatting, shrink this down a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see. So I'm just going to hold my Shift key from cell A1, cursor down a little bit, and then hit my end. I'm still holding Shift, end and down arrow to go all the way down to the bottom. And in fact, if you go over to the right a bit more, it won't hurt. You know, it doesn't add a whole lot of extra space to your spreadsheet or anything. Then click on Home. I'm going to change my format size, my font size to size 8. And now when I hit Control Home, that way I actually didn't have to bother doing anything with the column widths and change that. All right, for my field names, I like to highlight these, choose bold, center, and wrap text. For the values, now with these, probably what I would suggest doing before you format these is, you can see, you know, like this one's only got 2 decimal places or 2 numbers to the right of the decimal. These all have, you know, 4 and so on. Just page down a few times and kind of glance through some of your data and see if you have any numbers that look like they're really large. And the other thing to check as you're doing this, make sure that it is the general format, so it will display as many records or as many decimal places as we have. Then I'm just going to hit end and down, go all the way down to the bottom. I don't see anything that looks like I've got more than 4 characters here at all. Another way just to kind of check about how many decimal places you have is you can use a function called the length function. So what length does is it will give you the length of, in this case, some text. It'll interpret the numbers as text, and it tells me I've got a total of 6 characters here. 0 is one of them, decimal point is a second, 2, 6, 3, 7, 3, sorry. There's 6 characters there. If I copy this down by double-clicking here, I've got a whole bunch of 6s, and if I look down here at on the bottom on my status bar, the maximum number is 6. So chances are I've got 4 decimals at most, so I can format everything with 4 decimals. All right. Don't really need that anymore. Hit delete. It's gone. But it's just a quick check as you're doing that. All right, so I'm going to highlight these cells, Shift N down. I want to use a comma format. Now they all have 2 decimal places. Increase it twice. There's my 4 decimal places. And there's our cotton prices, $26.73. It's probably the price. It's probably like the number of dollars per 100 weight or 1,000 weight of cotton. You know, to tell you the truth, I guess I should have been a better cotton farmer and learn what these prices actually mean. But in our case, we're more concerned just about the numbers and the relative size of some of these numbers. All right, I've spent 10 minutes working on this. Let me save it, just so I don't lose what I have. And we've got that done. All right, some other things that we want to do. First is up at the top upper left-hand corner, I just want to count out my records and have that displaying up at the top. So I'm going to use the count function. And I'm going to come down to either the field name or the first record. Doesn't really matter all that much. Hit Shift, End, and down. And that goes all the way down to the bottom. Now, it's all right if you include the field number and that blank row there because the count function ignores text. So it's just going to count up the numbers. Type in a parenthesis, hit enter, and there's my 11,450 records. Let's just use, I can use this format painter from here, or I could have formatted with a comma and gotten rid of the decimal places, either way. So I'm just going to format paint that cell. All right, underneath it, I want to know what's the minimum, what's the average, what's the maximum. And you know what? I need to insert another row here. I guess I didn't get quite enough. There we go. Right click and insert another row. And eventually what I want to do is I want to find out the price level. In other words, if I look at these prices, you know, this one was $26.73, then it went up to $27.03, so it increased a bit, $27.06. It starts increasing. I want to kind of glance through these things and see if it ever breaks through a certain level. You know, does it ever get over 2,800, for example? And sure enough, here it is, 28.24. It happened on October 24th, 1972. It was the 44th record. So we're going to put in some tricks to show you how you can get that. All right, well, let's get the minimum. So we'll do the minimum. And actually, what might not be a bad idea, because dates are numbers, I can get the minimum of all these dates. And it tells me 26,533. Don't worry. I could also do the average form. It won't, it's a, you know, I don't know, this number probably doesn't really tell us that much, but still, we can try it. I'll show you what happens. I get 34,873.668. And finally, we do the max. And for the maximum date, I got 43,206. Now, if I use my format painter on one of the dates, let's see if I can grab that format painter. There we go. And now format those numbers. No, nuts. I didn't want to get all of those. All right, it won't hurt it. I'm just going to have to reformat my field name. So let's use the format painter on that one. Sorry, my mouse is getting a little bit touchy here. That's why I'm having troubles with this. And we'll format paint there. All right, when I do that, my earliest date, the minimum date was August 22nd, 1972. And the last one, the maximum date, is April 16th, 2018 for this data. And it doesn't really matter how I've got this data sorted. Let's save this before I do any sorting. And let's try sorting by value. So let's sort this largest to smallest. And notice that my minimum date and the maximum date didn't change, although the date order did seem to change a little bit because it's now sorted in value format. All right, let's take the minimum, the average, and the max, copy that over to my values, and let's use the format painter and format paint those numbers so we get the correct readout. And we'll choose these. So the minimum is 0.2660. The maximum is 2.1414, which sure enough, when I had sorted it, there's my maximum. If I hit end and down, there's the minimum way down here at the bottom. So those numbers check out. All right, let's go back and resort this by date. The oldest date to the newest date. And our numbers didn't change at all as far as the minimum and maximum, and that all looks good. All right, so I'm going to take these numbers here, and let's see, I've got the record number, or the row number, the record number, the date, the value. Then I want to find out if this broke a pricing level. So my pricing level, that's what I'm going to put up here. So let's just do this. Let's take one of our first values. I'm going to copy this and just paste it up in here. And we've got a number there. That looks good. Let's see. So what we could do, if it broke this pricing level, I'm going to do an if statement. Equals if, parenthesis, if this value, the price on the date, August 22nd, 1972, if that is greater than or equal to my price level. Now I'm going to hit function F5, function F4, so I always reference that cell. Now if that's true, I want to type in a Y, meaning yes, it broke through that level, that baseline. But if it's not true, I'm just going to type in N, no it didn't. And in this case, I've got a Y, so if I center that, and if I copy this formula down, I've got a whole bunch of Y's, but here was a date, September 8th, 1972, that the actual daily price was less than that 0.2673. So I can change, what's nice is I can change this number. I want to find out where it broke through 0.30. And it looks like for a bunch of these, it didn't break through. All right, these are all under 0.3. And we can start scrolling down and try looking for it to see. Oh, here it looks like it finally broke through sometime in November, and we can spot those dates. All right, well, let's hit Control Home and do some other things with this. Some other things that I want to do is I'm going to take the date and the value, copy those fields up here. And then I'm going to copy this across just so I've got the formatting the same. Now I want to know what the record number was for the minimum value. And I want to know what the record number was for this maximum value. And I want to know what the record number was for when the date, or for when that price level was finally broken. All right. I can do that using the following functions. If we do an equal match function, and my lookup value in this case is going to be the minimum price. I'm going to look this up in my range of prices. So I come down here to cell C8, hold my shift key, hit end and down, all the way down to the bottom, type in a comma, then it says the match type. I want to find out when it's an exact match, so I type in a 0, parenthesis, and enter, and it tells me that happened at record number 13, which if I come down here and look at record number 13, sure enough, there's 0.2660, there's my minimum value. So we'll try the same thing for the maximum function. If I copy this formula, my range is going to get messed up. So I'm going to type in a $sign here between the C and the 8. I want to type in a $sign between the C, and the 11,000. So it fixes those rows. I'll copy that down. And I find out that that happened in record number or row number 9658. I can format those numbers so they're a little bit easier to read. So I'll choose my format painter here. And let's format these. And we've got that. All right. It's not going to be very easy to find record number 9,658 because I'm going to have to just start hitting page down, and hold this for a week. And finally, I might get down there. So we'll try some other tricks. I want to find out what date that happened on. So I'll say that this occurred on. And we'll use an index function. And the index function says, give me the array. So my array is my dates, shift and down. Function F4 a couple of times so it locks those rows in place. Type in a comma, and the row is that record number. Type in a parenthesis, hit enter. And if I take this date and choose that format, let me try it again. Try format painter. There we go. Format paint this date here. And it happened on September 8th, 1972. If I copy this down, we can find out where the maximum was. It was actually in March of 2011. So we've got information like that. All right, I don't need these right now, so we can get rid of it. All right, so just different tricks to help you find out some information there. All right, let's do some more things. What we want to do is come to this broke the price level and find out when that happened to occur. So let's try out another match function, but in this case what I want to do is I want to say equals match parenthesis. I want to look up when we broke through the price level, when that equals a Y. So I'll type in a comma. I put the Y in quotes because it's text. My lookup array is all of these price levels. And the match type is an exact match. It's got to exactly match the letter Y. Type in a parenthesis, and that happened at record number 54. So let's see if that's true. If we scroll down here to record number 54, it looks as though that is our first Y where it finally broke through the price level, and there was the amount. So the value for that point, we can use an index function equals index parenthesis. The array is the values, shift and down. And the row number is my record number where that match occurred. Parenthesis, hit enter. And sure enough, it's that one that we had. At record number 54, it was 0.3015. And that occurred on index parenthesis. I'll go to my dates, shift and down, comma, grab the 54th row, parenthesis, and let's format that. Use the format painter, and we've got the day that that occurred on. So, some things that you can try out. If I set my price level, if I set that equal to the maximum, this is a good way to test this out. It happened on record number 9658. And that maxed up with what, or matches up with what we had for the maximum there. All right, so that worked out. If I want to find out when the price first went above $1 or $1 or something like that, it happened not until 1995 before that happened for the first time. So there's some kind of cool things that you can do with it. All right, finally, a few other things that I can do with this price level is I want to find out how many records actually meet that criteria. So there, what I'll do is I'll put in the number of records, and I want to get the percent of records. And let's just center those labels. And we'll do a count if function. And I want to count if all these Y's and N's, so I'm going to select those, if those happen to be the letter Y. So I put that in quotes. I find out there's 338 records that match this particular price level or higher. So on a percentage basis, it's 338 divided by the total number of records that we have, 450, sorry about that. And let's format that with a percent format and increase the decimal. It's roughly 3%. If we change our price level a little bit, let's try finding out anything that's over 2. There's only 19 records that, or 19 prices that ever got above 2.0. And it's 0.2% of all the records that we have. And let's check this out, make sure it's right. So let me save this. Let's sort the data in, well, I guess we could do actually descending order. So there's the highest price. There's 1. I'm just holding my shift key so you can see them. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There's number 20, which is below 2.0. So sure enough, there's my 19 records that all had broken through that price level. All right, control home. We're good there. Let's sort this back by the date. Get that in date order and also record number order. We've got our data saved. Let's add in a few more things that'll help us to analyze this data and get a pretty good feel for what we're looking at here. Since I've got the date, I want to know, I want to split this out in terms of like the year, the month, the day, do some of that kind of stuff to see if there's anything special about what happens on January of every year. The prices tend to be higher or lower than they might be during the rest of certain months. So let's put in the year, the month, the day. Let's put in the day of week, the week number. And I'm going to do a moving average. And I also want to do what decade we happen to be talking about. And I'll show you how you can do some of these calculations. All right, for the year, use the year function of this date. There's 1972. The month equals month, parenthesis, of that date. Cell B8, there we got that, equals the day of my date. The weekday function, and I'm just using my arrow keys to cursor over to the date. I've got the week num of these dates. If you want to format them, go ahead, select those. I wouldn't format the year, just leave that without any commas. But for these, we could use a comma format and get rid of the decimals. And once I've got those dates in, highlight them. You want to copy them all the way down, so just use your fill handle. And if I hit end and down, it went all the way down to my last record. So it saves a lot of time just using the fill handle there. All right, for the decade, what you can do is you can use the round down function, and I want to take my year and round that down to so many digits. If I do 0, all it does is it rounds it to the nearest integer. If I type in 1, it rounds it to the nearest decimal point. If I type in -1, it will round it to the nearest tenth. So hence, I get 1970. And if I copy this one down, all the way down, 2018 is still in the decade of 2010. And if I page up a bunch, I'm just hitting my page up key here, trying to look, let's see, there's 2017, let's keep going up. I'm holding my page up key and I better slow down. There you can see I'm into 2008, 2007, and that's in our 2000s. I probably should have slowed this down a little bit instead of hitting it quite so hard, because I want to get to that breaking point between 2009 and 2010. Let's see what, there's March. I'm just trying to page down here a little bit farther. See if we can find that breaking point. Here we're getting to December. There it is. All right, so the 31st to January 4th, that's where my decade now changes. Hit Control Home. We're good there. For my moving average, let's try a 200-day moving average. So I need to skip down 200 rows, if you will. So here's, we can come down and look for record number 200. There we go. And I'm going to type in equals the average of the value, and then hit Shift and up, all the way up there to, and then I came back down 1 just so I'm choosing record number 8. So C8 to C207, that's 200 rows. Type in your parenthesis, then you can let go of your shift, hit enter. Make sure it's formatted the same way, so, you know, comma format, increase a couple of decimals, and then you can copy this down, and you've got your 200-day moving average for all the data. All right, I realize this is going long, but we're almost there. We've got some calculations done. Now what we want to do is we want to chart this out and see how this looks. And I think the best way to chart things out often is using pivot tables. So I'm going to hit Control Home, choose Insert, Pivot Table. It grabs all my data, including the decades. Hit OK. It puts it onto a new sheet. Let's rename that one. Let's call this our Pivot Summary. And try adding something to it. So I'm going to, you know, I need a number. I need the value, the price of cotton. So I add that in here, and it gives me the sum, which basically that number is useless. It doesn't tell you a thing. So what I need to do is I need to move this off to the side, and I need to change the values where it's got the sum of the values. Let me see if I can click on that. Choose my value field settings. I want to change it to average. And then I'm going to give it a custom name just so that's not quite so long. So let's delete that out and type in AVG space value. Hit OK. And on average, there's the price of cotton, 0.67 and some change. So let's go to Home. Let's format that with a comma format. Increase our decimal a couple of times. Oops, I hit decrease decimal. Let me try increase decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. And again, you know, the number, this number itself doesn't tell us a whole lot, but if we would put in and look at this by days, that might tell us a little bit more. So let's add in date. And when I do that, it's automatically guessed that I want to average this by year. And if I open up my pivot table tools and add a pivot chart, and let's change this to a line chart rather than a bar chart. There I've got, you know, an okay chart. It actually tells us some information. So let's move that, see if we can move this up over here a little bit. Probably don't need this legend here. It's kind of redundant, so let's take that out. And it looks like there was a spike somewhere around 2011 with the price, cotton prices. And then we could, you know, that would be one of those things. Hey, I want to take a look and find out what might have caused that spike. Was it a drought that year that, you know, all the cotton crop did badly? Were there boll weevils that suddenly decimated all the cotton crops? You know, I don't know what happened there. And, you know, we could probably do some search and look in the old newspapers and see what we could find out with something like that. All right, let's try adding onto our pivot table here. Let's see if we can add in the moving average. So we'll check that. And the problem is when I check the moving average, it dumped that down in here. And I don't want it as part of the access categories. I want to actually move this over to my values. So I want it treated like the average price, right? But then when I did that, I get this weird chart, and it's just doing a count of it. So I don't want the count of the moving average. I want to do like what we did with the other one. We want to do the average of, if you will, the moving averages. So let's change this to average. And let's get rid of that long field name that it's trying to use up there. So let's call it the average moving average and hit OK. And there we've got a little bit smoothed line. Not bad, but it's probably trying to look at all this data at once that it's a bit much. So let's try doing a couple other things. If we click in our table, and let's go to Analyze, let's insert a slicer. And for my slicer, I want to add in the decade. And hit OK. And now that I've got my decade here, I'm going to move that off to the side a bit, just to make this easier to work with. We can shrink up that box. We don't need it quite that large. Let's try to select 1970 and see how that turns out. All right, so it changes this a bit. You know, one, as you can see, the 200-day moving average doesn't start for a while. But then what I want to do is I'm going to take my dates and I'm going to right-click on those and choose Ungroup. And when I do that, I've got a much more accurate chart. We can move this off to the size. You can resize this a little bit just to make it a bit bigger, easier to see. So let's try 1980, see what happened to it. 1990, 2000. There we had, you know, kind of this roller coaster ride, it looks like. But still, at least prices held fairly stable. And then in 2010, you can see during that decade, there was that big spike right in the early part of January, it looks like, and then prices kind of stabilized and stayed about the same for the pretty much the rest of the decade. So, you know, there's a few tricks that you can use for the pivot table. All right, the last one is if we go back to cotton prices, hit Control Home. I want to take a look at this in terms of a histogram and find out how much our prices vary You know, I mean, is there a lot of variation? Is there not so much variation? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the values, Shift and down. I'm going to insert a chart, and in this case I want to insert the statistic chart here, and I want to choose a histogram. I'm going to move this chart location to a new sheet, and we can recall or rename it histogram, histogram of prices, something like that. And when I look at all the data, you can see this is actually really skewed off to the right. You know, we've got this long tail of some of these prices that go out there. And that was probably that strange time period back in 2011 when prices really soared in terms of that. So what I can do is, instead of trying to look at all the data at once, I don't have the nice slicer that I can use for a pivot table, but what I can do here is I'm going to turn on the filter. So if I go to Data and Filter, and then come down here to Decade, I can uncheck Select All, and then choose, I want to take a look at what happened in the 1970s, and hit OK. And now that has just filtered out all my records here. So if I hit end and down, I only get those that go through 1970. All right. It still has all the data in the background, so that's not gone. But then when I look at my histogram, you can see now it's just using all that information just from 1970. And we can take a look and see how this varies for, you know, I mean, does the price variation change much from decade to decade? So there's a few things that we can do with that. All right, I'm going to go back to my original cotton prices. Last thing you should always do, add headers and footers, do that sort of thing. You know, adjust this so it can print out on minimum number of pages. Probably you're not going to want to print all this data out because there's going to be literally hundreds of pages probably with all those cotton prices. But to print out the pivot summary and the histogram and the source of the data, and maybe 1 or 2 pages of your cotton price data, that wouldn't be bad for a report, and you could give that a try. So I'll save that. I hope that gives you enough to work with on this particular assignment. Good luck, and have some fun analyzing something about cotton.